This night of Yom Kippur is called Kol Nidre because of its very powerful signature piece of liturgy, first played by our harpist this evening and then sung by our wonderful soloist, Orit Perlman. The words ask God to release us from vows we will make in the coming year that we cannot fulfill. What a strange request, before we have even completed the task of setting ourselves right with God over our past failures. In Kol Nidre, we look ahead and say, by the way, God, also give us a pass for vows we're going to break in the future. This puzzling text is elucidated in a helpful way by Rabbi David Stern. He asserts that Kol Nidre is really about humility. Kol Nidre grants us the gift of sacred uncertainty, says Stern. What if every time I was ready to proclaim some self-evident truth, I allowed Kol Nidre to whisper in my ear, says who? From this perspective, Kol Nidre is a prayer designed to release us from our tendency toward self-righteousness and certainty and turn us instead toward humility. Our troubling summer of national unrest since the George Floyd killing calls us to acknowledge that our society has a long way to go to eradicate racism. And inasmuch as many of us may vow that we carry no prejudices, humility calls upon us to consider that we do carry bias. These internal biases are the foundation of racism. These are the foundation of racism upon which our country is built. UW psychology professor Patricia Devine has studied implicit bias for 3 decades. Her research shows that biases are nothing more than habitual associations. Devine shows that it is possible for a person to simultaneously reject prejudice and still react to stereotypes and behave in prejudicial ways. I want to repeat that. It is possible for a person to simultaneously reject prejudice and still react to stereotypes and behave in prejudicial ways. Now, most of us place a high value on being unbiased. But like it or not, by habit, we all have biases. Now, I suspect that some of us may find this assertion insulting or even offensive. In an exchange this summer in the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator John Cornyn was enraged when Vanita Gupta, one of America's leading civil rights attorneys, stated that all people have racial bias. Cornyn responded, "Wow, you lost me when you want to take the acts of a few misguided, perhaps malicious individuals and ascribe that to all Americans?" But as Professor Devine points out, through scientific method, having bias does not mean that a person holds malicious intent. Rather, it's a description of a normal human psychological pattern. What's unique and uplifting about Devine's research is that she has come up with a process for conquering such biases. The key is the desire to overcome biases, to allow our values to overcome our habitual associations. She speaks of leverage points as moments when we can take a step to do something different than what we do habitually. Devine has 5 specific tools that a person can use in this regard. I won't discuss all of them, Examples of such tools are, first, stereotype replacement, and second, opportunities to connect with groups we tend to stereotype. On a trip to Washington, D.C. for a social justice seminar in February, 3 of our Beth Hillel teens experienced an example of stereotype replacement, the first tool. As the students waited for a speaker to arrive, they became uncomfortable when a disheveled and unkempt man walked into the hall. They were surprised to see him ascend the stage and take the podium, as they thought perhaps he would be escorted out. Soon the man began to speak about being homeless and was surprisingly articulate. As he spoke, he took off layers of clothing, revealing a more presentable appearance. This was not an actor, but a man who had once been homeless and now educates and advocates for homeless individuals. A second tool in the overcoming of bias is that act of connecting with groups we tend to stereotype. It could be, for example, listening to the experience of people of color, to try to comprehend what it is like to live every day without the privilege of being white. In Kenosha, we have a group that provides regular, courageous conversations where one can have this listening experience. And due to COVID, these conversations are now done online and recorded so that one does not have to be free on a given night or drive to Kenosha to experience them. There's one available right now on the Coalition for Dismantling Racism Facebook page that was recorded right after the recent Kenosha crisis. We think of Kol Nidre as a prayer about vows, but if we think of it as a prayer for humility and asking God to help us question our own assumptions, we can begin to see this moment of calls in the streets for racial justice as an opportunity. It's a chance to honestly look at ourselves as part of the problem and to repair ourselves as part of the solution. Kol Nidre provides the impetus that we need to open our eyes and our minds and our hearts to what might be possible. Beth Hillel's new Racial Justice Committee will be offering many opportunities in the coming year to learn more about the factors that have contributed to our nation's unequal distribution of wealth, access to education, employment, decent housing, healthcare, and more. But your first opportunity to learn from this group and with this group will be during our afternoon discussion sessions tomorrow. After this summer of George Floyd and Jacob Blake, let us turn the turmoil into a moment of self-reckoning. Can we peer through the smoke, the tear gas, and the crumbled buildings? Are we able for a moment to turn off the endless loop in our heads of protesters chanting, hammers boarding up buildings, and sirens screaming, so that we might discern a new direction? God, give us insight into our inner certainty, into our mistaken belief that we lack bias, and in so doing, grant us the courage to move forward humbly and courageously in this new year.